much for coming along today. We want to look today at the whole problem of learning in a time of global lockdown. People are not going to school, teachers are not teaching except online, and students are isolated from one another. This is a difficult problem because most learning goes on, as anyone knows involved in education, between students themselves, not just from the teacher or the textbook, but learning from each other. What we need to do is devise new ways in a global lockdown to reach out to one another and start to share experiences and inquiry over the few means that we have available, including the internet. So we're looking today at learning in a time of global lockdown, self-guided inquiry through transitionstudies.net. Well, you might ask, what is transitionstudies.net? It's a website, actually. It's something you can go to from your home computer, but it's basically an internet portal for news and information posted by the Cambridge Climate Research Associates. You can ask yourself what it is not, and it's very clearly not an authoritative website. In fact, it's rather an ongoing web blog that points to news and information aggregated from other online sources by the Cambridge Climate Research Associates. So, how can we use this weblog? Well, you can use it to start research on listed topics of one kind or another, but the emphasis is upon starting research. This is not an end goal of your research. It's only an avenue to get to information that you want to get and start thinking about. You can do it through the topics that are listed on their menu up at the top, or you can go to the site itself and search the site for topics that interest you. So both those techniques are possible. You can go to the listed links or to the search site box. To get started then, first log on to http://transition-studies.net. The front page should look something like this. Don't worry if the photo changes from time to time. The picture may change, but the menu options remain the same. So, in your browser then, go to the site and have a look online to see how transitionstudies.net can be of use to you. Well, you can join Transition Studies by logging into the website address, http://transition-studies.net. And there you can start looking around on your own to construct your own educational sequences. One of the things you'll learn is that education has been hard hit by this current lockdown, very hard hit. Take a look at the news story as it was presented.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York. Juan Gonzalez is co-hosting from New Jersey. As we turn to the impact of the pandemic on schools, universities, students, parents, teachers, and professors here in New York City, the epicenter of the pandemic, home to the largest school district in the United States, public schools have been closed since March 16th. At least 68 education department staffers have died from coronavirus, including 28 teachers, 25 teachers' assistants, also administrators, office workers, school aides, food service workers, guidance counselors, a parent coordinator, and a technology specialist. On Tuesday, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio announced a new grading system for the rest of the coronavirus-disrupted school year and said some so-called underperforming students may be enrolled in virtual summer school. This is Mayor de Blasio.
We want to make sure the grading policy we use now fits the moment we're we're in now and the reality of our kids, our parents, our educators now. So the chancellor, his team worked with parents, teachers, elected officials, advocates, listened to all different viewpoints. We've had a series of conversations confirming the direction of this policy. And it came down to the notion of what we owe our kids at this moment. First of all, flexibility.
This comes as the Los Angeles Unified School District, the second largest school system in the U.S., has announced no student will receive an F grade. California Governor Gavin Newsom said the state's academic year could start in late July or early August, and some K-12 campuses may reopen to offer summer school programs. Meanwhile, here in New York, at least 12 and possibly as many as 17 faculty and staff in the public City University of New York system have died since the coronavirus pandemic began, including 5 at Brooklyn College. This comes as universities nationwide face massive financial losses from closing down their campuses and moving instruction online during the pandemic.
Well, you can get a sense of this, and in fact, I urge you to look into these kinds of reports on transition studies. This is just one of them, and it's focusing on the logistic problems. We also need to address further on the questions of the educational component of this, not just the crisis to buildings, administrations, people, personnel, teachers, students, and support personnel for the entire school system, but also the question of what it is that we are learning in the process and can learn from now on in under lockdown. What's interesting is the way in which so much of what we should have learned from the youth is being ignored. Students, if you follow it in transition studies, have for a long time been demanding something new on climate change, pointing out that the world is changing much faster than any of the officials are taking into account. And people like Greta Thunberg have traveled around the world making this case that we need to plan for a sustainable future and raising the question, where can we turn to learn in the midst of abrupt climate change? Greta's pointed this out in several different occasions, and you can see it, in fact, by the way in which the media have generally responded to her presence and her message by saying, Greta, what's your problem? And they have, in effect, worked to marginalize and dismiss the rational and humane voice of youth across the world. It's not just Greta, but it's the students who have, in effect, been suing the government for a survivable future. Why should students have to sue the government to have a future to survive in? Well, Greta made it very clear, and it's so clear, in fact, that when you looked at the substance of what she was saying, it was really very embarrassing. Yes, out-of-control fires are devastating the earth. Floods and droughts are destroying the food supply. And as the seas continue to rise, scientists continue to affirm that hundreds of millions of people will be forced to become climate refugees. But other than that, Greta, what is your problem? This is in effect the way they dismissed her by saying she was too young to know anything, too young to be listened to. Well, students are fed up with that, and they're starting to draw up their own curriculum. It's from sources like this online source of transition studies that they can get in touch with new material, and you'll look into it because it's really quite staggering what they've come up with. Look at this dramatic picture in itself. A child, a woman, out in front of these government structured buildings in total social isolation, writing and registering statements like, let's save our planet. Extraordinary photo of an extraordinary event. But some of what we're facing now and need to learn about from students. On transition studies, you can get in touch with some of this material by, in effect, searching on your own from the transition studies menus that are drop-down menus from the top, some of which go straight to articles and web broadcasts on climate change, nuclear issues, public health issues, and in fact on the coronavirus itself. You can look at what's been covered in the news and what's the most recent news available. This takes you out to YouTube with the most recent stories on top, some of which are live updates. Transition Studies is not advocating these materials. They're presenting them to you in a way that you can start to integrate them like these students are, developing their own curriculum for a just economic recovery. You can also search the site for topics that may have interested you, like what's the goal and the pattern of climate change in the polar regions, for example. If you put in polar ice, what you'd get back from the study and the site is a list of articles indicating that polar ice is in real trouble. And in fact, some of them are longer than just articles. They're indications of essays that you can get to, essays that you can connect to and listen to for a half hour or so. Some cases, hour-long documentaries showing how polar ice is making us all vulnerable, changing the environment in such a way that animals are moving into territories that we thought were normally human-dominated or human-controlled. In any case, you should use this search engine as a way to get out to new and different kinds of materials that you may want to explore. Some of them include local webcasts here in the Boston area. As this case shows, for example, the Cambridge Forum, which has been in the front of a lot of this, sponsored the speech by an MIT scientist who's one of the world experts on this, and it was featured in the WGBH Forum Network, a source you should begin to explore through transitionstudies.net. Take a look.
Welcome to Cambridge Forum, discussing global climate change. I'm Tim Weiskell, a member of the Forum's board. The December 2009 Copenhagen talks on global climate change failed to produce a new international accord limiting greenhouse gas emissions. And more scientists and citizens are realizing that whether or not the international community is able to establish a plan to mitigate the rise in greenhouse gases, current levels of carbon dioxide and the course of industrialization in developing countries point to the need to consider the impacts of climate change and make plans for adapting, not just mitigating.
Well, you can listen to the whole length of these webcasts, getting access to them through the portal of transitionstudies.net. This is not itself a source of information. Transitionstudies.net is a portal that is a window through which you can see and get connected to other resources. But it's a very useful one for designing strategies of your own education, in effect, during this time of global lockdown. You can explore these individual things, search for them, go at them through the links up here, and get some insights from people who've been looking at these issues for a longer time. People like Noam Chomsky, who's now over 90 years old, have been contributing insights about why our culture and our country, in the United States in particular, has failed to do anything about climate change. on a scale that we should all be paying attention to. Take a look at what he said.
The Chamber of Commerce, the main business lobby, the American Petroleum Industry, other business lobbies have publicly proclaimed, in fact, with enthusiasm, that they are carrying out a campaign to try to convince the population that global warming is a liberal hoax. And it's succeeded, unfortunately. The latest polls I've seen show maybe a third of the population believes in anthropogenic global warming. The media contribute in their own way. So, for example, when the New York Times runs a front-page article on what meteorologists think about global warming, namely, they don't believe it. Meteorologists are pretty faces who read scripts telling you if it's going to rain tomorrow. What do they have to say any more than your barber? But that's presented as if it's a significant contribution to the discussion. The same when they, in pursuit of the fabled objectivity, present two sides. One side is 98% of scientists who know anything. The other side is Senator Inhofe and a couple of stragglers, and that's the two sides. And people are supposed to make a choice between them. They leave out a third side, which is the substantial number of climate scientists who believe that the consensus predictions are much too optimistic, including some of the leading scientists right here who've recently run what they call the most extensive modeling ever done that concludes that it's far worse than anticipated, and that their own results are an understatement because they don't take into account such things as effects of methane after permafrost disappears and so on.
Well, you can listen to the full interview. It's really quite staggering and gives us an insight as to why it is we haven't had any leadership in America and won't from the corporate world because of the ways in which their corporate structures are set up to make profit off of the expanded use of fossil fuels. Take a look.
Back in both countries, back in the 50s, the labor movement was actively pressing for health care, but in different ways.
He then brings in the kind of historical importance of the labor movement for health care. This was years before Bernie's program or anyone else since has been talking about the vulnerable aspect of American health systems. Get in touch with what you can learn in transition studies because it's a platform for investigation, for constructing your own itineraries of research, and for getting out to the primary materials behind the window. The portal itself is not an authority. Transition Studies is not a website, it's a web blog pointing to other sources. Learn how to use those sources in order to start constructing yourself and then reaching out to others to teach them as well. College teachers, high school teachers, individuals, in fact, students who amid the shutdowns are beginning to devise their own curriculum and start to draw upon this information and make it quite valuable as something to share with one another. We need now to rethink learning under the global lockdown. In fact, we need more broadly to be rethinking learning and teaching on a small planet. Learning and teaching. Learning and teaching are never going to be the same after this experience of a global lockdown. Educators have long known that the most effective means of learning is through peer-to-peer teaching. This is a lateral model of teaching and learning. Lateral learning works because students of all ages are both naturally curious and naturally generous. We want to learn, and we want to share what we have learned. This kind of teaching and learning gives us the best chance of inventing the transitions that we will need to make to survive on our rapidly changing planet. Each one, reach one, each one, teach one.